Welcome to What Happens Next. This is the 50th episode, and I've got an amazing guy to join us on episode 50, a gentleman called Ian Harrison. Now, Ian Harrison is a coach. He helps people navigate transitions. And in this interview, we talk about a number of really pertinent subjects. Firstly, we talk about navigating identity. Who am I if I'm not my job? It is a question that I've been asked by clients in the past, and it's a difficult one to answer on your own. And Ian talks about the fact that instead of thinking about us as a job and the danger actually of tying our identity too close to the actual job, maybe thinking about looking at it from the other way, saying what skills and attributes do we use in our job that are actually convertible to the next chapter of our lives. We also talk about the amazing insights from Viktor Frankl. And if you've never read a book called Man's Search for Meaning, I'd recommend you pick that up today. It's an amazing book with a really actually tough life story of Viktor Frankl. If you don't know, Viktor Frankl spent time in Nazi concentration camps and saw his family actually get destroyed by the Nazis, but came out with this really interesting psychological perspective that helped him not only survive the concentration camps, but thrive throughout life. So we talk a lot about Viktor Frankl in this interview, but we also talk about Ikigai, and we talk about Martin Seligman's Martin Seligman, if you don't know, is the grandfather of positive psychology, and we talk about Martin Seligman's definition of what human flourishing looks like using his PERMA model. There's so much great stuff in this interview. I know you're going to love it. I will see you on the other side, and here's the interview. So at the minute, I'm spending a lot of time writing the What Happens Next book. I'm 50,000 words in as I speak to you today, and currently working to make sure that the book adds as much value as we can to people thinking about that next stage in their lives. Now, the book's not ready yet. It won't be out until sometime in 2025. I'm working hard to get it finished. But what you can do is sign up for the book waiting list, so you're one of the first people that gets access. You can simply do that by visiting whathappensnext.life/book. Join the waiting list today, and you'll be one of the first persons to get access to the book and some extra goodies when it comes out. Welcome to this What Happens Next interview with Ian. I'm really excited to be interviewing Ian today because I know there's going to be a bucket load of insight in terms of our conversation, particularly if you're thinking about what happens next in your life and you're wondering the practical steps you might want to take, but also the areas you want to think about when thinking about being at that crossroads, making a transition, and some of the aspects about both work but also life that you might want to be thinking about when you're thinking about what happens next. Before we start that conversation with Ian, though, we've done something on What Happens Next to help you think about well-being in a more nuanced way, because my experience as a financial planner and running my business for the past decade and a half is that often people think about the money side primarily when they're thinking about making change, be it retirement or whatever's next in their life, but don't often look at some of the other aspects of their well-being. So what we've done is designed a quiz, which right on time writers put the QR code up for. Feel free to scan the quiz. That will take you straight to the quiz. And what the quiz will do is give you an insight into the areas of well-being you're potentially strong at, but some of the areas you might want to consider doing a bit of work in to improve when you're thinking about approaching that crossroads and what you do next in your life. And I'm really excited to have Ian on to have that conversation today. So, Ian, before we start digging a bit deeper and looking at purpose and values and work and how it fits into into our lives as we consider re-navigating, tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, so when I was thinking about this, it really struck me that what I'm about to do really, in answering that question, really comes into the conversation later. So you've asked about me, and I'm probably going to answer by telling you what I do rather than who I am, which is what we all do. So in terms of what I do, I'm a coach, I'm a facilitator, and I suppose what drives me in that is the desire to make other people's experience of life better. And it took me quite a long time to understand that that's probably what's driven me throughout my entire working life.
Yeah.
I work around the UK supporting leaders to develop their leadership skills, but also to build better work experiences for the people who work for them. Outside of work, I'm a father, grandfather, husband. For better, for worse, I follow Blackburn Rovers. So you'll find me on a Saturday when they're at home in Blackburn, watching that. And I suppose underneath all that, then I'm an introverted people person who loves chatting with people and is just genuinely curious about life and what makes us all tick. So, but just coming back to my comment at the beginning, I just thought it's really interesting as I wrote that, as I sort of thought about that question, I just thought, do you know what? I'm doing exactly what I think I've talked to people about, which is that we ask each other, tell us about yourself, and we start with I am, which is a statement of being, and then we talk about what we do.
I know. I know. I suppose the interesting thing about that is in when it comes to thinking about the roles we play, we always immediately jump to work, don't we? And it's that element of saying, well, is that me? Is that part of me? Certainly. But the why do you think we do that? Is it just living in a society where work was valued, or what do you think that is?
I think so. I think we all do tie our identities in with what we do.
Yeah.
Which in some ways is natural because we probably express who we are through what we do, whether we're paid to do it or not. But at the same time, I think we can tie ourselves up in knots by our identity becoming too closely associated with what we do.
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting point, particularly when we're working with clients who are like it's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about this in my own life, and what's been helping me is journaling. So, like, sort of every morning, I ask myself a bunch of questions, and that helps me sort of work out sort of whether I'm doing the right things during the day. And it's interesting because ultimately the question I ask isn't, have I built really good financial plans today? Clearly that would be part of it because that's the work we do day to day for a client. The question I ask is about positive impact. And it's about making sure that whatever we're doing on a particular day, we're having a positive impact on people's lives. And that's big picture, right? Because that could mean anything, but articulating that helps me sort of work out where we need to go. The interesting point is often when people come in to speak to me about the money, it's because they're at a point where they're thinking about making change, and part of that change might be like a fundamental impact on their identity. So we've got business owners who are selling their business, and then suddenly they're not business owners anymore. How do we navigate that fundamental change in identity because we're changing in what we do successfully? Do you think?
So I went through a career change when I was 40, and really, I think just afterwards, really did hit this problem. I really couldn't work out where to go next, because I felt like ultimately I'd lost a part of myself.
Yeah.
And it was a phone call with a friend who was also a coach, who said, and it's one of those moments I can take you back to the place I was when he said it. And he said to me, Ian, you've got to remember, you are not who you are because of what you did. You did what you did because of who you are, which sounds like just words, but it really unlocked something for me to realize that the question I needed to ask was, what was it about me that led me to doing what I've been doing for the last 20 years?
Great question. Yeah, love that.
Instead of just feeling like something had gone, because it hadn't gone. All that had gone is a particular context in which I'd been expressing myself. So I really had to get down to who am I, and I started by introducing myself as having a desire to make other people's experience of life better. And eventually I managed to articulate it that clearly, but that sense of what was it about what I used to do that really expressed who I am and what I really loved and what was important to me. Yeah. So I think sometimes people don't want to go there, but actually if you hit that moment, it's an existential moment, and it's not going to be answered practically. It's going to be answered with some self-reflection about who we are and what's important to us.
Yeah, and that the bit that I'm curious about is, in your experience, because you've gone through that, what happens next moment is that's not an immediate thing either. I imagine that took a bit of time for you. So what was the journey that got you from, oh no, I'm now in a position where I've lost a bit of my identity, to a point where you went, I sort of know where I am now?
Actually, it was for me, it took a long time to unpick myself, because my previous life had been working in the church. It had been very vocational, and even more easy to tie yourself up, your identity into it, than perhaps even what.
Yeah, because you've got the community element and the faith element as well, right? So there's other aspects.
Yeah, so I was working through all that, and I think if I go back to as I began to realize I needed a career change, the first phase was like feeling stuck. And then I looked at some choices which, looking back, were just expressions of desperation and feeling lost.
Yeah.
And then I sort of discovered coaching and realized it was something I'd been doing anyway, but also began to realize it was something I enjoyed. So it did. At that point, I'm not sure I was understanding why, but I was tapping into an emotional response that left me feeling fulfilled and enjoying what I was doing and feeling like I could make a difference. Sorry?
Was there a... Because I've been thinking a lot about this, and I because I'm writing the What Happens Next book at the minute, was there a period of grief? Because like that element of, like, I really like the Kubler-Ross grief model and that sort of adaptability to change. Was there a period where you had to sort of go through that experience of loss to redefine?
I think that there is. I mean, and of course, at the bottom of that curve is depression, because you've accepted that the loss is real, but you just don't know where to go from there. And I think that, for me, expressed itself. I had a practical need to get back and start earning money again. And so I started looking at some I remember thinking, so for me, this is very specific to my career change, but part of my thing was I thought of the work I'd done in the church as theology based. Well, where's the application in the world? Who's going to employ me? So I then started looking at things like, well, the only thing I'm good at is driving, and all the stuff I looked at was all coming from a depressed place of I suppose I'm going to have to. And then somebody pointed me towards coaching, and that was the first moment. I remember going on a taster course and ringing my wife at the end of the first day and saying, the metaphor I used was, this is like putting on a new fitted glove, because suddenly I'd found something that fit me.
Yeah.
So even though there was lots of new and lots to learn, I felt like something fit me. I fit in this space and I enjoyed it. But I think it took, if I'm honest, it probably took me years to get to that really neat description I used at the beginning of realizing.
I think the big thing there is, for those of us who are thinking about sort of what happens next in our lives, it's a journey, isn't it? And it takes a while to get to. Don't expect to, like be the finished article at any time. Are we ever?
No, absolutely not.
Big question there. Probably not. That transition for a lot of us can take a while. Now, one of the things that you touched upon already is that digging a bit deeper, thinking about purpose and meaning in our lives, and as somebody who considers himself fairly curious, and I know you are too. What are the sort of questions you think are useful to ask yourself? And I love that. I love that start saying as like why you do what you do as opposed to the role. That's a great sort of starting point. But what other questions do you think might be useful to ask ourselves when we're thinking about what's really important to us?
So I think we recognize what's really important to us in the places where you can look back and say, what are the things that made me feel most fulfilled? And if you can list all those and you can look at, so what did those things have in common?
Yeah.
You can then get out of the detail of what you used to do and begin to understand what it was in there that left you feeling fulfilled. An exercise I've got people doing occasionally is a blank piece of paper, right at the top, the words "I am."
Yeah.
And then on the paper, write down everything you can think of that could follow those two little words, "I am."
Yeah.
Because actually, it's you'll find that you are so diverse and you are so many ways of describing yourself. None of them can be complete by themselves. So, I said earlier, I'm a father and a grandfather. And that tells you a little bit about something, but it doesn't tell you, those words don't even tell you what kind of father I am, but they certainly don't tell you anything about my life and myself outside of the context of my relationship with my kids.
Yeah.
And again, I just get people to reflect on what they notice as they write those down. And then the other model I find really useful in this is Ikigai.
Yeah.
Because there are 4 questions that fall out of that model, which is, what is it I love? What is it I'm good at?
Yeah.
And then if you're looking for next steps, the other 2 questions on the other side of the diagram are, what does society need? And what will people pay me for?
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, to look at the model that way and say, if I can answer those 4 fundamental questions, I can get close to understanding myself and what I want from life and how I can contribute to life. So I think that's a great model to use to sort of question yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And we've had a lot of what happens next guests reference the Ikigai model because it's so powerful and pertinent.
Yeah.
Where would you start with that model? Would you start with the internal questions or would you start with the external ones? I'd start with the internal, I think.
I would too, but I think that's a personality thing. So if we think about, so I think at the heart of who we are is something that's quite intangible and undescribable. And if you're religious, you probably call it a soul. If you take a more biological view of what we are, you'll still end up with you might talk about the self, and and I think some of us naturally start that space. Who am I?
Yeah.
But for an awful lot of people, that's too difficult a place to go. But ultimately, who I am expresses itself through my values, through the stuff I choose to do, the stuff I enjoy doing, the kind of difference I want to make in society. Yeah. So that suggests you can start on the outside and you can start on those questions with what's the difference and work backwards into, so what does that say about me?
Yeah. You know what's really interesting about that exercise with the blank sheet of paper with I am at the top is that could start, and I'd imagine you can tell me, but that starts with the easy answers first, doesn't it? You know, it's like I am a dad, or I'm a business owner, or I'm a financial player, whatever it is. I'd imagine that the further you get down the page, the more difficult it gets, but also the more insightful. Would that be true?
Yeah, because you probably go from talking about relationships and activity to more adjectives, more descriptive words. And so you're beginning now to get under the surface. And I think you have to be patient with yourself. You have to give yourself time for that exercise. But I think it's a really interesting exercise, and you can then work from that outwards. Okay, looking at that, what stands out? You know, what does that tell you about yourself?
Yeah, really interesting. And I think, like, when we're thinking about purpose and meaning, I know that sort of as am I. I mean, Man's Search for Meaning was a book that I read a few years ago. It was particularly pertinent for me because I read it in Poland just after I'd visited Auschwitz. So it felt very visceral, actually.
Yeah.
It was that, you know, it was visiting the place, connecting me to the work. But I know that his work post being in the camp has had a fundamental impact on certainly my life, your life, and many others around the world. Why do you think Frankl was so insightful? Tell us a little bit about his story, and what do you think he can teach us about purpose and meaning? Why do you think he's so insightful in terms of that?
So I think Frankl's really interesting, particularly, and quite challenging, particularly to those of us who live in richer societies, because he builds his understanding of psychology and his understanding of meaning and purpose out of a place of having nothing else. So I know we've talked in the past, if you look at something like Maslow starts with wealth. And naturally suggests that we need certain practical physical things in place before we can achieve self-actualization. Frankl goes the other way, which is what I find fascinating. So Frankl looks at who survived in the camps. And there's a passage that always stood out to me, which was, he talks about the choices you have in terms of how you think about life in the camps. So you're in a concentration camp where they've stripped everything they can strip away from you. And And he talks about there were those who came into the camp who longed for the life that had been taken away from them. And he talks about how quickly they diminished and often physically died. And then he talks about those who tried to get through by looking to a future that didn't yet exist. But if I can cling on to the idea that there's life after the camp, then maybe that's the way through. And they equally quickly diminished and lost hope and often died. And he was one of those who, instead of doing either of those, went, what I've got to do is face today's problems. And then after the war, he takes that and comes out to say there's a great quote I wrote down from Frankl. What matters, therefore, is not the meaning of life in general, but rather the specific meaning of a person's life at a given moment. And he talks about meaning is found in facing up to the challenges and problems life sets us in any given moment. And that's where we express ourselves.
You know what's really interesting? And again, I'm framing this because I love this philosophy. It's a very stoic attitude to life, isn't it? It's a very focus on what you can control. Don't worry about anything else. Look at life through that framework of what can I do today. And it's interesting that if you look at that stoic perspective, you've got, Zeno, who was a slave and who had nothing when he was trying to do this, all the way through to Marcus Aurelius, who had all of the wealth and power in the world, who still felt it meant nothing. And that attitude is an interesting one, isn't it? And I think I look at that and go, those universal truths about life have been around for thousands of years. And Frankl was hit upon that.
Yeah, and I think they come out of all those ancient religions, don't they?
Yeah.
All comes back to everything else is transitory.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting in the whole thing, which again Frankl resisted in his thinking after the war, what I find fascinating about the whole emphasis on purpose and meaning is that in our modern society, which we could describe as post-religious, people seem to be looking for something outside of themselves to give them their definition of purpose and a reason to live. And I'm not sure, I get that if you're religious, but if you're not religious, where do you think that's coming from?
It's got to come from you.
Actually, sorry?
It's got to come from you.
Yes, absolutely. And I think ultimately, if you analyse the religious experience, it comes from you. Yeah. I really hope you're enjoying the interview so far. But now what I'd like you to do is take action to help you work out what happens next in your life. The easiest way to do that is to do the What Happens Next quiz. It's free to do, takes about 5 minutes, and you can do it while you make a cup of tea and wait for the next part of the interview. You can visit www.whathappensnext.life/quiz. You'll get your results by email immediately. And what the quiz will do is give you an insight into the areas of wellbeing you're doing really well at, but also the areas that you might want to improve. Enjoy the quiz. Let us know what you think. And let's get on with the interview. Yeah, it's so interesting. But I mean, you're right. In wealthy countries where again, every country's got poverty and people going through different experiences. But in relatively wealthy countries where we've got more opportunity, what practical lessons do you think we can take from Frankl's experience and what he teaches us? So I think it's good. I think partly it's about gratitude. So one of the things gratitude does is it stops us taking things for granted.
Yeah.
And it's I remember hearing lots of Eastern teachers talk about having no attachment to the things of this world, and it was not something I could ever really work out. How do you do that? How do you actually not attach yourself to the things you have and the people you have and the relationship you have? Of course, you're going to attach yourself, but actually, in a weird sort of way, gratitude detaches you.
Yeah.
Because it says, I know this isn't something I can assume will always be there.
Yeah, it's that. It's funny. I've got a 12-year-old. So my two girls are 20 and 12. And one of my favourite things to say to Sophie at the minute, it's a challenging time. She's like on that sort of 12, 13 period. One of my favourite things, and I think it's more of a reminder to me than to her, was most things are a privilege and not a right. So most things are, you're just lucky to have them. And I think, interestingly, when I'm doing my journaling in the morning, it's what are you grateful for today? And often it's simple stuff, but just having that regular reminder is incredibly useful. Habits, where do habits come into play when we're thinking about what happens next? And because I know that having those frameworks in place is helpful for me. And where do habits play a part?
Partly, in the first part, is it depends whether they're good or bad habits. I think you could treat, just responding to that thought about whether they're good or bad habits, you can treat habits a bit like you can treat beliefs. That we form habits because in some level we felt they did us good. And in the same way, beliefs, we sometimes outgrow beliefs and we need to let go of them because they're now, instead of helping us, they're now holding us back. I think we can first thing we can do is look at our habits and say, is this habit helping us right now?
Yeah.
Or is it got to a space where it's outlived its usefulness?
Because you're right, even bad habits served a need in our life at that particular point in time, didn't they?
Yeah. And they might not have served it in the most helpful way, but they satisfied something we needed, and therefore we became committed to that way of being or doing or whatever the habit was. I think you can then, in the sort of thinking about what's next, developing good habits that sort of are about looking for opportunities. I remember, again, early on in my career change, I came across a book that everyone was talking about that back then, and sort of think it's probably a good thing that most people aren't talking about it, or not as many people talk about it these days, which is The Secret.
Right.
And I'll probably get in trouble for this, but I think it's a highly flawed book. But
I agree, by the way.
Yeah. But one of the things that the way I ended up interpreting it, or part of it, was that if I behave in ways that are helpful to what I want, I put myself in the way of stuff that will help me.
Right.
And I train my brain to see opportunities.
Yeah. That book's so interesting, right? Because there is a psychological foundation that there's some lessons there that might be really interesting, because you could turn around and say, as you say, if you've got a window on the world that actually is looking for chances to develop what the life and the meaning you want, that's a good thing. it's the pseudo-scientific element that I've got a bit of a challenge with.
Yeah,
and manifestation is you've got to do the work. I mean, that's the reality of it. You've got to.
Yeah. And you can, and the other thing is, you can do the work and you still might not get what you're after.
True.
Because even, it's the same when we run businesses. Business is about putting the hard work in, but business success always comes with some luck.
100%.
But it's that I never know who to attribute this to, but it's that saying, I found that the harder I worked, the luckier I got.
Yeah. But the line is never straight, is it? There's no direct, it's always that element of do this and then you get this. It's just the world is more complex and nuanced than that, and you've got to appreciate that. When I was doing the research for this interview, I came across something you've done on LinkedIn talking about wellness.
Yeah.
And how you speak about having a different frame and thinking about the way we view the world as an opportunity to look at wellness. And I'm really curious about that, because what we're trying to do in part with what happens next is have more nuanced conversations about what a life well lived looks like.
Yeah.
Because often when clients are coming to see us, they assume that just because they might have enough money, that's enough. And our experience is that often they realise that whatever's next, they've got financial security, but there's gaps in other elements of their lives. Yeah. And what we want to do is have a bit more of a nuanced conversation about well-being. Is that where you were coming from when you were looking at that worldview for wellness, or was it something different? And if so,
yeah, it was. I mean, a question I find myself often asking entrepreneurs I work with is, how much is enough?
Yeah.
Because what they do is they set themselves this ambitious number that they want to achieve, but they don't really think about why did they choose that number? What would that number give them? So a client I was working with last year or earlier this year, and I asked that question, and it led to him. He's well on in his entrepreneurial journey, realizing that actually he needed to scale back a bit because his pursuit of a number financially was actually denying him time with his children.
100%.
And that actually, if he scaled back the number, it wouldn't make a huge difference to what the money was giving him.
Yeah.
But it would make a huge difference to his family. And so he adjusted it. So when it comes to wellness, the first thing I think is a challenge right now with everyone talking about wellness is about a definition. So what do we mean? And for me, I always end up going back to Martin Seligman's definition in his book Flourish.
Yeah.
So that we need positive emotion, engagement, relationship, meaning, and achievement.
Yeah.
And so if you put that into the sort of what happens next context, it's great to be in that place potentially of financial security. So maybe what you do next doesn't have to actually earn money because that bit's there, but you're still, to be well, you're still going to need those 5 things.
Yeah.
And it's just then about, so where am I going to discover that? And the worldview piece that I tie into that is that if we're to experience those 5 things, we need to understand the world in a way that's not individualistic. For me, the worldview that leads to wellness is a worldview in which we understand how interdependent life and the universe is, that we can't isolate ourselves from it. One of my soapboxes is the whole concept of a self-made man. It's a myth. Nobody's a self-made man. You might have worked really hard to get where you got, but you'll guarantee that an awful lot of other people had to work really hard as well and supported you and
100%.
added to that. And
100%. And what's really interesting about that is, particularly in Western societies, I'm thinking a lot about this at the minute as I write what happens next, because one of the things that I'm looking at is what other cultures do well and what they do differently. And if you take, for example, the Blue Zones research and the importance of community in the places where people live longer in the world, like sort of Okinawa in Japan, have a concept called moai, which is about just having a crowd of friends that just help and support you along that way. It's a very collectivist culture, as opposed to the individualist culture we get, particularly in the UK and the US. The other inspiration I love is the Scandinavian model, which all of the Scandinavian countries come up as quite happy, and actually they're capitalist in nature to a certain extent, but they've got this culture of collectivism and the importance of social bonds and community a little bit more in prominence than maybe the UK and the US.
Yeah.
And that's always curious to me, what works in those countries.
Yeah, and I think this is where we get into difficult waters, because I think there are problems with the really collectivist societies.
Sure.
It's a bit like if you overemphasize anything, you're going to end up in a difficult place.
True.
But for me, I end up, my reference point is always this biology. So there's a great book called Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard.
Right.
And she was a biologist who was at the forefront of understanding the what we now understand to be the true nature of woodlands. And it's really interesting that she was, if you look at sort of historically at forestry in the Western world, particularly, the forestry industry looked at a stand of trees and they saw a stand of individual trees that might cover hundreds of square miles, but they saw hundreds and thousands of individual trees. So their theory was, all this other stuff that's not tree, strip it out because it must be competing with the tree.
Right.
And that was the way they replanted forests. They used herbicides and all sorts of other things to
remove anything that would compete with the tree needs, right?
And the result is that now there's huge problems in the US and Canada with disease and pests that are sweeping through these monocultural forests or woodlands because the ecosystem's gone. And what Susan Simard showed was the particular role of the fungal network under the ground that connected all these different plants and she showed this amazing underground world in which trees are sharing nutrients with each other. Different species of plants are sharing nutrients with each other. They're also sending out electronic warning signals so that if there is a pest enters the environment, trees deeper into the woodland begin to develop a resistance. So she showed how literally how we had stopped seeing the wood for all of the trees.
Interesting. It's so I mean, I think the interesting thing there for me is the individuals who are making the decisions about how those forests are built. It seems to be that they are bringing their individualistic worldview, which is a competitive worldview, right? Not a collaborative one. It's like, get rid of any competition. When in reality, actually, it's about coexistence and collaboration primarily. And
where you end up with is, so there's other interesting work being done on fungals, and Merlin or Mervyn Sheldrake. There's another interesting book which is focused on fungus. But he has a phrase that life is biomes all the way down. And he shows how life doesn't exist. We as biological machines don't exist except for resident other life forms that we are codependent with. And they're not part of human physiology. They're things that live in us and on us, but we absolutely need them to stay healthy. And it's that recapturing that sense of that the wellness of the individual is intrinsically linked with the wellness of the whole. And that's my world. That's I suppose the worldview for wellness that I was driving at, is that sense of recapturing. I need to look after you because it's not just because it's the right thing to do, but because actually your wellness is intrinsically linked with mine.
100%. Yeah, 100% agree. And one of the things that we know, because all the evidence points in this direction, is that element of social and community in our what happens next framework language, social and community well-being are the underlying factors that drive all happiness and well-being. It's sort of we did a sort of writing for the book at the minute, and I did sort of a few words about the fact that loneliness in our lives has such a detriment, not only makes us less happy, but actually has detrimental health impacts equivalent to 15 cigarettes a day. Now, we can link that directly to like the fact that we've evolved to be codependent. We've evolved to be, reliant on one another. And often that individualistic element then is sort of, oh, go and do it on your own. Well, you don't.
No. And you look at those things, Seligman identified, engagement is a connectedness to something outside yourself. Relationship is about other people. Meaning is by sort of making a difference to something that's bigger than yourself. So at least 3 of his 5 ingredients for human flourishing require us to be connected to something that's bigger than ourselves.
But what's interesting, and this is sort of my experience, and we're going to talk about work in a minute, and how that plays a part potentially to our sort of what happens next chapter. But often the elements that are the bit that adds the most value in our lives aren't about money. They're not. No. They're about relationships, and they're about other people, and they're about positive impact. So interesting.
Yeah. But money is an enabler, isn't it? Money. I think. Money doesn't actually give you anything. It can be a marker of your success, so it can be a sign of achievement. But ultimately, that will be very short-lived, because in the end, it then just gets put in a bank.
Yeah.
And then it's about, what does that enable? Because if it's just an end in itself, it becomes very unfulfilling.
But the challenge we've got, and I completely agree with you on this, is we don't ask the question about how much is enough.
Yeah.
And we give away a brochure we've got to help people identify how much is enough financially. And the idea of giving that away is that if you know how much is enough, not compared to other people, because that doesn't matter, or how much is enough to live the life that you want, then you're empowered to make better decisions in your life.
Yes.
But often that how much is enough, because we are social creatures, is about, well, Dave sold his business for 10 million, so I need to do that. Not really. What you need to do is work out the life you want to live, and using money as a tool, work out how much you need.
Yeah. There was a really interesting opinion piece I read some time ago, which was asking the question, why are there so few women billionaires? And I don't know whether this is true or not, but it's an interesting opinion. And the author made an argument for the fact that the route to being a billionaire is that you become a multi-millionaire with hundreds of millions, and then you risk all of it in that big step up into the billionaire category.
Right.
And the author argued that the reason there are so few women billionaires is because it's a massive ego moment. And more women, once they reach the hundreds of millions place, are likely to go, do you know what? I'm all right. I've got plenty. I don't need to take that risk.
Yeah.
Whereas there are more men, the male psyche is more inclined at that point to risk everything again.
And again, I think it says a lot about emotional maturity, but as you say, it's more difficult for the ego to turn around and go, you know what, I'm all right. But the story, and again, it's one that I've probably repeated on What Happens Next a few times, is a story that Kurt Vonnegut tells. I don't know if you've heard about this.
No.
And Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller, so both sort of really popular, successful authors, get invited to a party, and this party is on an island off of New York by a hedge fund manager who's got multi-millions, hundreds of millions of pounds. And Vonnegut, they walk into the party, and Vonnegut teases Heller by saying, you know what, your best book, Catch 22, sold millions, but this guy probably earns more in a week than you've ever done in your lifetime. And Heller goes, yeah, you're probably right, but I've got something that this guy hasn't got. And Vonnegut's come, well, look, this guy's got everything. Look at his house. And he went, yeah, I've got the knowledge of enough. And it's really interesting. Sophie's here. Sophie's not. She's gone. It's really interesting about, right, are you coming in or?
Mango.
A mango, what's that?
It's a seed of a mango.
Okay, brilliant. She just wanted to show me a seed of a mango. Raz, can you cut that bit out or do something with that or keep it in or do whatever you need to? But yeah, that element, let me see where I'm going to start again. So that element of knowing how much is enough is really interesting, I think. And just thinking about that is probably an important part of the journey. But even for people who have got enough or want to change what they're doing, but still think work is an important part of their lives, how do we think about working out what's next from a work perspective, if we think that's important?
So I think we can almost go back to what we've been talking about with, so first of all, what's the difference I want to make? So, and how can I go on making that difference?
Yeah.
But we can also go back to Seligman and say, what gives me positive emotion?
Yeah.
what are the things that give me a sense of being engaged?
Yeah.
What are the relationships that are important to me that I need, and that we're always going to answer that question, family first, right? But we also all need relationships outside of that. Where do I find meaning? And how can I go on with a sense of achievement? And for me, if you've got to the space where financially you've got enough, maybe it's not work. Maybe it's not paid work. You have the freedom to do stuff that makes a difference without people necessarily having the funds to pay you. But you don't need to be earning what you have been earning, but you still need some income. So you can switch. That is still an amount of freedom you didn't have previously, because
I think you make a really important point, though, because actually, if we're considering what happens next in our lives, that doesn't need to be at a point where we know we've got enough. Because actually what we can do is make more nuanced changes about the balance we get in our lives way before we're financially independent.
Yeah, there's a thing I use with people who are expecting to stay in work, and with business leaders, that people need a healthy environment, basic income, by which I mean the income that pays your mortgage, pays your bills, puts food on the table, means you're not worrying about stuff. And then you need an amount of life-enhancing income, which will be different for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really useful breakdown of sort of what I need. So even if I'm not in that place where I've got enough that I can completely stop work, this is a career change rather than a semi-retirement or anything like that. What do I need to be looking for? Well, I need to be thinking about all the stuff we've been talking about who am I and what kind of difference do I want to make and all those things. But also I want to find somewhere which is going to be good for me, a healthy environment.
Yeah. I
need it to cover my basic needs, and I need that life-enhancing bit, whatever that means for me.
Yeah.
And again, you can pull it back to Ikigai, can't you? The important bit of that circle of what are people prepared to pay me for? Because if you need income, that's a really important question. And I was talking to my son about this yesterday, actually. I did some work years ago on the board of an arts organisation. And the world of the arts has a particular issue among some people, not all, of the arts are worthy and therefore almost have a right to expect people to provide them with cash. And it's a really difficult mindset to get through to some people that, look, I always use painting because it's the simplest version. If you're a painter and you enjoy that, but nobody wants to buy your paintings, you've got a hobby. If you want to be a professional painter, then you've got to paint stuff people want to buy.
Yeah.
And it's no good painting stuff that people don't want to buy and complaining, because not that your painting isn't worthwhile in an artistic sense, but it's not worthwhile in a providing you an income sense.
And that goes back to what we've been talking about, because we're all interdependent, right? Like no man is an island. If we live in this world where you might assume that you give value to the world, but if nobody else agrees, it's interesting, isn't it? Finding that bit in the middle of the Ikigai model where all of those elements align. And for most of us, there's something there, but it takes time, I think, to really identify.
And in terms of thinking about what happens next, what happens next in terms of our job doesn't have to be in the middle.
No,
it has to overlap with the bit what the people prepared to pay us for. but it doesn't have to be the perfect job that sits right in the middle of that Venn diagram.
So a couple of things I'm really curious about, because you did describe yourself at the start as a introvert, but likes people and likes having a positive impact in people's lives. How do you square that circle? And when we're thinking about sort of what happens next in our own lives, because I'd imagine that your professional speaking and your work with teams requires you to have an element of challenge with what sometimes you're comfortable with. Where does that fit in, do you think?
So I think challenge is good for us, just generally. I think it was Stephen Bartlett recently said something like, if you're not experiencing imposter syndrome, you're in the wrong place. And what he's getting at is you're not challenging yourself. So I think challenge is good for us. I think for me, well, the introvert people focus thing, I love being with people. I love talking with people. I love interacting with people. The introvert piece sits in knowing myself in terms of the reflective way I think, that the way I, after the back of this call, without me putting any effort into it, my head will just go through as huge amounts of detail about could it have been better and all those things. I will reflect on the detail. I also know that as much as I enjoy being with people, I recharge my batteries by myself.
Wow. Yeah.
Or with very small groups of people who I know intimately well.
Yeah.
And I think it's a confusion that people have about introversion and extroversion, that introverts, they aren't people focused, but lots of introverts are people focused. The introversion piece is just about how you process stuff.
Yeah, and
how you recharge.
Yeah.
So, later this week I'm going to serve a birthday drinks thing. There'll be 30 or 40 people there. I'll have a whale of a time. But I'll be tired at the end of it. It won't recharge my batteries. It will just be fun.
Yeah. Where an extrovert might turn around and go, that's the place I need to recharge, right?
Yes.
It's really interesting. I think that's a common misconception, actually, with introversion and extroversion. Now, one of the really interesting things that I read on the sort of on your testimonials on your site, which we're going to sort of certainly point to at the end, is thinking about career change. Because I know you've done some one-to-one coaching with people where career change was forced on them, as opposed to having the choice. What are the practical things that people should think about that we haven't talked about already when they're thinking about changing the work environment they're at?
Yeah, let's go to one of those people I work with. So a client who was in his 30s, had a life-changing road accident that meant he couldn't go back to the career he had before the accident. So, I mean, some of what he needed to work through is related to stuff we've talked about. He had to let go of the past that had gone and his past career. So he had in some way to try and detach himself from that, and all the challenges we talked about right at the beginning around career change and what's next were involved. But sort of beyond that, it's then sort of, it's almost the same question we talked about in the context of money. What somebody once called it, it's the Spice Girls question. What do you want? What do you really, really want? And again, in the same way we've talked about what's enough, what will money give you? So then it's about looking at your career and saying, what do I want out of the next phase of my career?
Yeah.
So forget the specifics of actual jobs or career paths I want to take. Let's look at what it is I want to get out of those things.
Yeah.
What will they give me?
And that won't only be money, will it? That will be money. Will be one aspect, but I want to fill my social bucket. I read a really good book. I've been away in Malta last week, and I read a really good book called 4,000 Weeks, talking about by a guy called Oliver Burkeman, and he was talking about this philosophy. Actually, a lot of it was the themes that we've talked about today, but he talks about the fact that we've romanticized in the modern technological age the concept of the digital nomad. Like, you can work from anywhere, you can work from your laptop, you can. And his argument against that was really interesting, because we glamorize this work from anywhere, be anywhere, and for some people with certain personalities that might really work. But actually, if I look in the mirror and look at my own life, I go, well, I like coming home to my family every night and having a base. And yes, I like to travel, but actually travel's enhanced for me by the memories I create with the people I love and like, not doing it on my own.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting how, and same as work, I get money from work, but the reality is that I get so much more. And it's, as you say, thinking about what you really want out of that experience, right?
Yeah, and purpose. What's the difference I want to feel I'm making when I turn up at work?
Yeah.
And that might be through the nature of the work, but it might be through your interaction with customers, or colleagues, and tying the digital nomad thing in. If the sense of the difference you make is through the relationship you have with your colleagues and the interaction you have with your colleagues, what you don't want is a job that is largely at home, not interacting with people. Not that working from home necessarily means that you're not interacting with people, but there are some jobs which are very done, especially if they're done at home, are very isolating. And if your sense of purpose comes from making a difference by supporting your colleagues, then even the practicalities of the job are going to make a difference. And you might be the person who's attracted to that 5-day-a-week office job because that's 5 days a week with people.
Yeah.
I'm the same as you, I think. And it's interesting, the digital nomads I know are all people who very quickly form friendships. So what they're getting out of it is they're going to a foreign place and living there for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, during which time they'll build up a social circle.
Yeah.
Whereas if I went, because I take longer to build relationships, if I went into that space for 3, 6 months, I wouldn't know many people. It would be a very different experience for me.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. It's about that. That's a fair point, because they're not ignoring community; they're just quite happy to build community quickly, right?
Yes.
And it's a different, a really interesting perspective on that. Really good point. I've loved today. Really enjoyed the conversation, and as typical with what happens next, we've gone on a few tangents, which are really insightful. One question that I do want to ask you, and again, I haven't prepared this one, but I'm really curious about it. We connected because I read your book and got in touch and said, I think what you're writing about is interesting. But that was particularly about managers and their ability to enable people to potentially do better work, but also live better lives. Where does the people we work with, particularly if they're in senior roles, play a part And do you think we could be better coaches in our day-to-day lives and help people live better lives? Where's the line? Where's the line in terms of saying, well, actually, I'm paid to do a job versus the ability to enable?
So the two sides, enabling your team will mean that you're better at your job. So I think that's just the best managers and leaders and the people who get the best results for their business are people who enable other people to be their best. So I think that if you're trying to lead and manage by controlling people, you're not doing your job well. So, to be blunt. But I think the other piece is that I think every survey, no matter who does it, all comes back with the single biggest influence on people's experience of work is their manager. And coming back to the whole thing about a worldview for wellness, if you're a manager, you are the single biggest influence on your team's experience of work. And therefore, and when you think how much of our lives work occupies when we're of a working age, that means as a manager, I'm the single biggest influence on their experience of a significant part of life.
Yeah.
So I just think we need to take that seriously. And therefore, those skills of enabling them to do well, setting them free to succeed, changes people. It's a positive impact on people's experience of work. So for me, the work I do around the enabling manager, my personal motivation is is layered. I get pleasure out of that because I know that if the managers themselves take this way of working on board, their lives as leaders and managers get better. But I have a deeper piece of satisfaction I'm getting out of it, knowing that when they go into their workplaces,
it's a ripple effect, isn't it?
It ripples out. Yeah. Hence the whole thing about making people's lives at work better is my mission. And the way when we're teaching the enabling manager skills, for me, that's a way of improving people's working lives.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing there is if we think about everything we do, like we don't know who's going to watch this.
No.
My aim is that we make a positive impact on somebody's life and make their journey to whatever's next in their life easier. But I know from my career, my life, you know, the stuff that we've done in the past is that ripple effect is certainly a powerful one, and one that we need to consider. Ian, thank you for today. I've really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Really enjoyed it too.
Really interesting conversation. I know that you watching this at home will hopefully take some of the things we've talked about and apply them to your lives. Where can people find out a little bit more about you?
And they can reach out on LinkedIn. Just search Ian Harrison on LinkedIn and you've seen my face, so you recognise the right Ian Harrison. Or have a look at the website, growhouse-gb.com, to see what we do through the business.
Perfect. Thank you. And we'll put all the links on the video on YouTube and when it goes out on LinkedIn too. Thanks so much, Ian. I think Ian shared some amazing insights into reflecting on where we are, but also looking at the next chapter of our lives. But I'd love to know what you think. So please let us know. You can get in touch with us and all our contact details on the show notes or at www.whathappensnext.live. I also would recommend that you check out our YouTube channel, which is going great guns at the minute, and there's a bunch of insights you can find on there. But that's it for today. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you on the podcast soon.